All right, let's dive in. Today, we're doing a deep dive into artistic vandalism, which is a term coined by YouTuber Nuxtaku.
Right.
And we're going to be using his video essay to explore this concept.
Excellent.
So to kick things off, what exactly is Nuxtaku getting at with this term artistic vandalism?
Well, his central argument is that a lot of modern adaptations and reinterpretations, they stray so far from the original work that it almost feels like a disrespect to the original artist's vision. You know, it goes beyond just like, oh, this is a bad adaptation.
Right.
He's suggesting that there's a deliberate intent to alter the original work, often to fit specific agendas.
And he doesn't hold back, does he?
No, not at all.
He calls it a perverted world of artistic vandalism.
Yeah, he's very passionate about it.
To illustrate this point, he uses a really fascinating historical analogy.
Yes, he does.
About statues in Florence, Italy.
During the Medici family's reign.
Right, the Medicis.
Exactly.
So can you unpack that a bit for us? What's the connection there?
Sure. So after the Medici family regained power in Florence, they commissioned this statue of Neptune to be placed in the same square as Michelangelo's David, which was, of course, a symbol of the rebellion that had previously ousted them.
Right, a powerful symbol.
And they also placed a statue of Perseus, you know, holding Medusa's head directly in David's line of...
And Medusa's gaze, in mythology, that could turn people to stone, right?
Exactly.
So it sounds like the Medici were making a pretty bold statement.
Absolutely. They were using art, you could say, to symbolically petrify the ideals represented by David.
Wow, that's pretty clever.
But here's the key point, and this is what Nuxtaku emphasizes. The Medici, they didn't deface or destroy David.
Right.
They engaged in this artistic rivalry, but they didn't resort to vandalism.
So even in this historical context where you might expect, I don't know, blatant disregard for opposing art.
You'd think so.
There was still this underlying level of respect for artistic integrity.
Exactly, and that's the standard that Nuxtaku is using to critique modern adaptations.
I see.
He's saying that many modern adaptations lack this basic respect for the source material.
Okay, so let's get into some specific examples that he uses to illustrate this point.
Let's do it.
He starts with the Netflix adaptation of Avatar, The Last Airbender.
Yeah, the live-action one.
Which, you know, had a ton of hype,
Yep.
but ultimately faced quite a bit of criticism.
Right, a lot of fans were disappointed.
Yeah, so what's Nuxtaku's take on that adaptation?
Well, he points out that the showrunners, they were very open about their intention to improve the original. By addressing what they perceived as sexism in the original, and they wanted to give it a more mature kind of Game of Thrones vibe.
A darker, grittier feel.
Exactly.
So their intentions might have been good, but it seems like the execution maybe didn't land for a lot of people.
Yeah, including Nuxtaku.
So how does he break down where it went wrong?
He argues that these changes, although, like you said, maybe well-intentioned, led to a distortion of the original story and the characters.
Right.
Like one example he highlights is the alteration of Zuko's banishment scene.
Oh, man, that scene in the original cartoon, that's like so powerful, you know?
It really is.
Zuko refusing to fight his father, the Fire Lord, in that Agni Kai, the fire duel, and getting banished as a result.
Right, and that act of defiance, it's rooted in his honor.
Yeah.
It's key to understanding Zuko's character.
Absolutely.
But in the Netflix adaptation, Zuko actually fights his father, and he loses because he hesitates to strike the final blow.
Oh, wow, so they flipped it.
They did.
Okay.
And Nuxtaku's point is that this change, it significantly alters Zuko's motivations.
Right.
And it undermines his initial sense of honor.
Yeah, it's like they went for this spectacle.
Visual drama.
Over the nuanced character development that made the original Avatar so compelling.
Exactly. And he makes a similar argument about the portrayal of Sokka and Katara.
Okay, how so?
He claims that their characters were kind of altered to push this women are strong message.
Okay.
Even though, I mean, the original already showcased strong female characters.
He's not against strong female characters, is he?
No, not.
It's more about how the characters are portrayed.
It's about the simplification, you know, the reduction of complex characters to fit a particular agenda.
Right, right.
He points to scenes, for example, where Katara's compassion and nurturing qualities, which are so integral to her character in the original, they're kind of downplayed in favor of highlighting her fighting skills.
So it's like they're trying to make her this action hero.
Kind of. And he's saying that this reinterpretation, while, you know, maybe intending to portray female strength, ends up flattening Katara's character.
Using that nuance.
Exactly, the nuance of the original portrayal.
So sacrificing nuance for a particular message, that's a recurring theme in Nuxtaku's critique.
It is. It pops up again and again.
And he sees a similar pattern in in some of Disney's live-action remakes, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. He definitely does.
Especially Mulan, the 2020 version, and the recent Little Mermaid.
2023.
Yeah.
He argues that these remakes, even though they claim to be empowering female characters, actually diminish the strength and complexity of the originals.
Interesting.
Like, take the animated Mulan, for example, her cleverness and strategic thinking. That's what allows her to succeed.
In this male-dominated world, yeah.
But in the live-action version, she's portrayed as almost supernaturally skilled right from the beginning.
Oh, so less of a journey, less development.
Less of a journey and more about showcasing raw power.
Okay, so Musaku sees that as a problem.
He does. He argues that it robs the story of its nuance.
And what about the Little Mermaid? Ariel, in the original, she's very strong-willed.
Determined.
Yeah, and she makes this risky deal, to follow her dreams.
Right.
What does he say about the live-action version?
Well, he points to the climax where Ariel, not Prince Eric, defeats Ursula.
Oh, interesting.
And while that might seem empowering on the surface, he argues that it diminishes Eric's role and kind of alters the dynamic of their relationship.
I see. So again, prioritizing a specific message
over the complexities of the original story and the characters.
Okay. And he really doesn't hold back when it comes to Disney's Star Wars sequel trilogy.
Right. Oh, boy. That's where he really lets.
So what are some of his main criticisms there?
One of the big things is the decision to decanonize the expanded universe,
Legends timeline.
Yeah, which had this incredibly rich history and, a dedicated fan base. Decades. He specifically mentions Darth Revan and the Yuzhan Vong.
Right.
Just two examples of compelling characters and storylines that were essentially wiped away.
Yeah, and his frustration goes beyond just losing those specific elements, right?
It does. He argues that the sequels, while visually impressive...
Oh, yeah, the special effects were incredible.
...lack the thematic depth of the prequels.
Interesting.
Which really explored these complex ideas about the fall of democracy, the seductive nature of power, all that.
And you're saying he doesn't see that in the sequels?
Not to the same extent. He contrasts that nuanced exploration of freedom and choice in the prequels with what he perceives as a more simplistic good versus evil dynamic in the sequels.
Okay, I'm following you.
And he also critiques the portrayal of Rey, the protagonist.
What's his issue with Rey?
He argues that her strength and agency are often showcased, but at the expense of coherent storytelling and believable character development.
So it's like they're trying so hard to present this powerful female lead that they kind of forget about crafting a truly compelling and internally consistent narrative.
That's his argument. He believes it's another example of artistic vandalism, where the agenda overrides the artistic integrity.
And then there's Velma.
Boy, Velma.
The HBO Max series. He really goes in on that one.
He does. He's especially critical of the changes made to the characters.
Like how so?
Well, he particularly focuses on Fred. In the original Scooby-Doo, Fred is kind of this well-meaning, but maybe slightly clueless leader.
Yeah.
But in Velma, he's portrayed as this incompetent, entitled, kind of like a caricature of a rich kid.
So a complete departure from the original.
A very drastic reimagining.
And what about the other character?
Well, he highlights the show's almost like caricature-like approach to characterization,
Yes.
He argues that the characters are reduced to these simplistic stereotypes.
You're losing all the charm.
The charm and the complexity that made the original Scooby-Doo gang so endearing.
Right.
He points out how Velma is portrayed as unlikable. She's constantly ranting about societal issues.
Okay.
And Shaggy, he's depicted as a traumatized drug addict.
Wow. So very, very different.
And the mysteries, which are, the heart of Scooby-Doo, they're practically non-existent.
So he's saying that Velma completely abandons the core appeal of Scooby-Doo, which is the fun of solving mysteries.
Absolutely. He feels like the show is more interested in showcasing edgy humor and social commentary than in actually crafting engaging whodunit.
And he criticizes the show's handling of mental health and trauma, right?
Yes, he does.
Velma has hallucinations.
Because of her unresolved issues.
And Shaggy has PTSD from a particularly disturbing event, which we won't go into here.
It's pretty dark.
Nuxtaku's concern is that the show is trivializing these serious mental health conditions.
Using them more as plots.
Rather than exploring them with any real sensitivity or depth.
Exactly.
He also points out the show's contradictory messages.
Like, how so?
Well, it condemns religion,
Yeah.
but then simultaneously presents supernatural phenomena as real.
Right. It's kind of jarring.
Yeah, so it seems like he sees Velma as another example of prioritizing shock value and provocative themes.
Over coherent storytelling.
Over meaningful character.
Exactly.
It's interesting. how Noxtaku kind of connects these specific examples to these larger trends in our culture.
Yay.
He sees it as a symptom of something bigger at play.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some of the forces that he sees driving this artistic vandalism?
Well, one of the big ones he talks about is this whole phenomenon of outrage farming and the influence of Twitter activism. Like, essentially what he's saying is that studios are so afraid of online backlash, of being canceled,
Right, the fear of being canceled.
that they prioritize avoiding offense over telling a good story.
So it's like they're walking on eggshells, trying to please everyone.
Exactly.
And that ends up resulting in this bland, uninspired content.
That's Noxtaku's concern. He believes that this climate of fear just stifles creativity and leads to this kind of more homogenized, risk-averse approach to story.
Makes sense. He also talks about diversity and inclusion consulting companies.
Right.
Specifically mentioning Sweet Baby Inc. And GamerX.
Yeah, those are some of the big players.
And it's not that he's against diversity and inclusion. It's more about, I think, how these companies operate, right?
Yeah, his point is that while these companies claim to promote diversity, sometimes they push a very specific agenda that doesn't always align with good storytelling. And he feels like their involvement in some cases has resulted in, forced diversity, token representation, this kind of sense of pandering rather than genuine inclusion.
It's like they're more focused on checking boxes than on creating compelling narratives.
That's his critique.
And then he also criticizes localization companies. Right?
It does. The ones responsible for translating and adapting foreign media.
Right, for different audiences.
And he provides some pretty detailed examples of how they've altered dialogue and even character motivations in ways that he finds problematic.
And this raises a really interesting question about the role of translation and adaptation. Where do you draw the line between cultural sensitivity?
Yeah, that's a tough
and altering the original work.
And Noxtaku argues that some localization companies overstep their bounds, essentially censoring and rewriting content to fit a particular world.
And to really drive home his point, he brings up a very serious example, the case of manga artist Hako Ashihara.
Right, a very tragic case.
Who took her own life after protesting the adaptation of her work.
And it really highlights, I think, the potential human cost of what Noxtaku calls artistic vandalism.
Yeah.
He's saying that studios have a responsibility to respect the vision of the original creator.
Especially when adapting work that is so personal and meaningful to them.
Exactly.
It's a sobering reminder that these changes, they're not just abstract debates,
Yeah.
They can have real-world consequences.
Absolutely.
So given all of this, where's Noxtaku think we go from here,
Yeah, what's the solution?
What's the takeaway for listeners?
Well, his message seems to be a call for greater awareness, I think.
Okay.
And discernment.
More discerning consumers of media.
Yeah, thinking critically about the content we engage with and not just passively accepting changes.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, he encourages us to ask questions like, do these changes enhance the story?
Okay.
Do they deepen the characters? Or are they primarily meant to push a specific message?
Okay.
Maybe even at the expense of the original vision.
So really thinking about the motivations behind the changes.
Yeah, and recognizing the forces that might be shaping the art we experience.
Okay, and he believes that this increased awareness could lead to a demand for better storytelling, right?
Yeah, he hopes so.
More authentic storytelling.
Where artistic integrity is truly valued.
So it's a call for a shift in how we approach art and adaptation, right?
Absolutely.
Both as creators and as consumers.
It's a culture, really.
He's saying, while specific examples of what constitutes artistic vandalism might be debatable, this broader trend of prioritizing agendas over quality, that's a legitimate concern.
That's the core of his argument.
And he's urging us to recognize and resist that trend.
To be conscious consumers.
So it's not just about complaining, it's about advocating for this.
A more thoughtful approach.
Yeah, a more thoughtful, respectful approach to adaptation.
Where the integrity of the original work is valued.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Noxtaku's take on specific adaptations.
Yeah, a lot of examples.
His concerns about these larger cultural trends.
This idea of artistic vandalism.
But what's the overall takeaway here? What does he want us to do with all this?
Well, I think at its core, it's a call to action for us to be more mindful, more aware.
More conscious consumers of the media we take in.
Exactly. Not just passively absorbing whatever's put in front of us, but really engaging with it.
Asking questions.
Thinking critically about the choices that are made, the changes that are introduced.
So when we're watching a movie or reading a book or playing a game, game.
Yeah, any form of media, really.
We should be thinking, okay, is it change? Is this addition? Is this whatever? Is it serving the story? Is it deepening the characters?
Or is it maybe detracting from the original vision?
Right, and recognizing that, adaptations can be done well.
They absolutely can.
There are ways to honor the source material.
Bring something new to the table. Add to it.
Without, completely distorting the original or pushing an agenda.
And that's what he's advocating for, a more thoughtful, more respectful approach to adaptation.
Where the integrity of the original work is valued.
And I think that's something we can all get behind, regardless of our personal tastes or opinions on specific adaptations.
So, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into artistic vandalism, we want to thank you for listening and for, engaging with these ideas.
It's a complex issue.
Yeah, it's not black and white.
There's a lot of nuance.
But hopefully, this discussion has given you some food for thought.
Some new perspectives to consider.
And maybe even a new framework for how you approach the media you consume.
We encourage you to keep diving, keep exploring, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us.